Namaskara and welcome to BIC Talks, a podcast by Bangalore International Centre, bringing you conversations that move, inform, and encourage discourse.
Hello, I'm Pavan Srinath and welcome to BIC Talks. If you're a long-time listener of the show, you may have heard my voice across the first 100 or so episodes. It is a pleasure for me to return to the show and to the institution. Over the coming weeks, between your hosts Lekha and I, you can expect original programming on BIC Talks with guests and topics from wide-ranging fields, as well as curated audio from the best of Bangalore International Centre's physical and virtual events. In the first half of October 2022, The Wire ran a big investigative story which claimed that one of India's ruling party members had the powers to automatically take down posts on Instagram. After initially doubling down on the story, The Wire eventually retracted it later in October and eventually published an apology citing a failure in editorial standards. At a time when big tech platforms like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Amazon, and others are accumulating immense societal, economic, and political clout, holding big tech accountable is an important part of tech journalism. Venkat Ananth joins me on this episode of BIC Talks to discuss what makes for good tech journalism in our country and what we can learn from this incident and others. Venkat is the co founder and CEO of The Signal, a free to read daily newsletter on technology, business, finance, economy, and policy. Venkat has been a business and tech journalist for over 15 years, having worked at Mint, Hindustan Times, The Ken, and Economic Times. Hi Venkat, welcome to the show. I wish we were recording under happier circumstances, having seen a story with big allegations and implications against a powerful entity like Meta that has since fallen apart and has been retracted. Even before diving into what is good tech journalism, we first just need good journalism, right?
First up, thanks for having me, Pavan. It's great to be here. One of the biggest lapses in the Wire story was the fact that I don't think they sort of figured out the company properly. They figured out the platform. I think there was a lot of reverse reporting to fit the story they wanted to tell. And to me, that is a complete problem. And it's something that we are seeing creep in over the last few months, over the last few years. I think the Wire is not an exception. We've seen a lot of stories of this kind to some extent fall apart even in other countries. As you rightly said, there is this whole sort of movement, if I could say, to hold big tech accountable. I think what we are also forgetting in that sense is also journalistic accountability, which is absolutely important because at the end of the day, you live and die by your story. You may not live and die by your sources, but you live and die by your story. I think they got a little carried away by a potential small lead that they may have gotten, which was the takedown of that Instagram post, and then just sort of retrofitted other means like Amit Malviya's XCheck status without understanding what XCheck actually was, going down a rabbit hole from where recovery was impossible because it was all being played out in the public domain.
And over here, the bigger the story is, the more that you need follow up and confirmation,
Yeah.
triple confirmation,
Absolutely,
etc. Right?
absolutely. The stakes are high, right? The stakes get even higher. I mean, and especially with a story with a premise of such a high magnitude, in the sense that, there is this guy who's a high ranking official of the political party who can just swoop in and ask Facebook to take down posts in 2 minutes from accounts he's not even following. Is this even possible, right? I mean, they fail to ask the right questions. I think a lot of journalism and good journalism is asking the right questions. And to me, the rather shocking part about this is not the reporting, but the fact that an editor let it pass. A lot of good journalism happens in private. For the first time, you saw something play out in public. People were getting defensive. People were going on the attack against experts. It's usually not how things play. And I think the smell test that came through for me was Facebook actually questioning the validity of the document. I mean, Facebook never does this. This Sunday, Wall Street Journal broke a story about how Facebook's metaverse is a boring place and nobody wants to be there. Citing internal documents, Facebook did not question those documents. To me, one of the reasons why was because Wall Street Journal quoted from the documents, which the wire didn't do. That actually, to some extent, establishes that you've reviewed authentic documents. And to me, that is something that they didn't do. And obviously, we now know to a reasonable extent that that document was indeed very problematic.
So Venkat, you've been on both ends of this. Now you're co-founder, and you're in the editorial role. You've also been a journalist in the past. How do you get due diligence done? Due diligence sounds boring, or due process sounds boring, but in a nutshell.
There are various steps to the process, but let's go back to the first step. I mean, you have a lead, you verify that lead multiple times, you verify it with multiple sources. Such a big story, right? Of this magnitude. I'm not going by average stories. I think in most average everyday stories, you probably get 2, 3 source verification and you run it. But when you're doing a story of this magnitude with such potential impact, you revisit your story multiple times to see what are the holes, to see if there are any areas I could have done better. And until release, you sit back, it's a bit like how a criminal lawyer works hard to prove his case. There is a check on the person, there is a check on the source in this case to see if she has said something correct. If she has said something correct earlier and she wants to retract, why she wanting to retract? You have to play this as a puzzle. And a good investigative story, I think, has to be an assimilation of all those pieces of a puzzle, right? To me, I think the failure in this case was it was not done. At a broader due diligence level, I think first check if the source is credible. You don't know that. I mean, this is just some Instagram post that somebody has taken down. Secondly, you cross verify everything, like everything, leave nothing to doubt. Context is separate, right? Your reporting is just merely that Amit Malviya has XCheck powers and he used his powers to take down. Everything else is context. Now, that is something you had to verify. You had no choice. As I said on a Twitter thread, Amit Malviya probably has XCheck powers. I would be surprised if he's not, because he's
If there are
leading-
5.9 million
exactly,
people,
and he's one of them. And I'm fairly confident that Siddharth Vadrarajan is also an XCheck person. That is not the story. The story is how and what they could have verified and what they did not. XCheck itself is under review inside Facebook. You're talking about a program that Facebook's oversight board, which is their own Supreme Court, is reviewing, has raised questions about it. Even the press has raised questions about it. The fact that the reach or the powers of XCheck had been expanded and stuff, you had enough of a scenario to doubt if Facebook would ever do it. That is due diligence also, which is going back to publicly available information, discerning it, and seeing if this even adds up. I know in most cases documents are hard to get, but seek documents. If you're claiming something around, oh, the company is doing so well, you go back to the MCA, you go back to some of those publicly available documents. I mean, so to that extent, I think it's a very integral part of a good investigative story. It has its place, and I think perhaps now in these times, particularly after the story, will have a higher degree of importance, although I'm not very sure how many people will do it.
and it's not even that one person said one thing and two other people also said the same thing, but triangulation actually means, do you have a distinct means of getting the same information, right? Through
Correct.
a document, through something in the public
Exactly.
domain,
So- exactly.
through something from company
Exactly.
filings,
I
etc.,
mean, exactly.
where things add up.
Correct. Things have to add up. Things
And-
have
and-
to add up.
And
That's
tell
it.
me, you've been working on stories for a long time,
Yeah.
big and small, and you have to shelve certain stories because you just don't have enough of the meat, right?
Absolutely. Unless you want to go on a goose hunt, in which case you're sort of digging further holes. I particularly feel if 2, 3 leads of yours don't check out, might as well call it off. There is that reporter's persistence in you where you want to go, you want to, you've got that sekida, as they say, right? You want to go and dig more. But then it's also the amount of time and effort you've invested into getting the source, getting the lead, verifying the lead, etc., etc. So much so that you're not driven by the story, but you live a certain, sort of a time of your life with the story. Now, do you want to give it up all at go? No. I personally would like to shelve it for some time else. I mean, bank it. And that's something I've done even at ET, at the Ken as well, a couple of times. So, bank it to revisit some other day, because you never know when you get a lead, and it's like eureka moment, right? You get somebody who said, "Hi, I've heard this." Yeah. I mean, okay, batao kyun, matlab, how have you heard this? Like, thing, and if he or she just shows me something which dovetails what I've already reported. I mean, that's pretty much what I want. Now, am I going and looking for it? No. Once I finish my due diligence, and sometimes if stories don't work out, am I going to keep looking for it? No. I think it's something that you have to live with as a reporter. It's something I've lived with. And I think I can speak for a lot of people here who have just given up chases because either they are not working out. I mean, and
And,
stories.
and that's at the journalist level, and sometimes even at the editorial level, it's like,
Editorial level
hey,
is
this is not cooked enough.
yeah,
I can't run this.
editorial level is a different conversation because you do call up stories because it's not ready enough, it's not sourced well, it's not watertight. I mean, you want it to be watertight, you want it to be, I'm not saying beyond reasonable doubt or anything of that sort. Those are very exaggerated terms I don't want to use, but you want things to check out and you want things to add up at the base level. It's like how a lawyer builds a case. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, you want to go, you want to make your case, but you have to build it first. And if in the building process there are gaps, I think you'd rather park it for later and revisit it, keep it in cold storage. And you don't know, someday you might get it. As an editor, right, you have this nose, you have this BS indicator in your head. I mean, which is why you come up there, right? And
That's what you have to accumulate over your decades of
yeah,
journalism to rise
and
up to.
exactly. And I good editors also can see through your sourcing, can see through your due diligence, can see through your reporting. I mean, the writing is fine. The writing is the last stage in the process, right? It's a bit like a one-day match, that nobody cares about the middle overs, but the middle overs is where matches are won or lost. I mean, you can have a great power play, you can have a excellent finish to the innings, right? But in the 30 overs, if you don't score 150, 200 runs, I'm using a cricket analogy, your foundation and your charge is gone. So I think journalists need to sort of start, and good journalists, and there are lots of those in this country, by the way, who just need to start, playing the middle overs well, and enough to interest, so that you can go and go to the next stage of sort of writing a good story.
So now, if we talk specifically about tech, now
Yeah.
many of the issues that you've mentioned work with everything, right? You're reporting on something that the government's doing, you're reporting on what a scam that's happening. You need to do all of this work to break a big story. And we've done plenty of amazing journalism in this country over several decades, right? So, what is it about big tech or tech overall which further complicates this or brings in any unique challenges?
I think with big tech, I think the problem is that first and foremost, you get overawed by their power. I think their power is so enormous, so ginormous that you think, oh, big tech can do anything. Big tech knows so much about me. Big tech knows so much. It must be in bed with government. While all of that is true, it's just that it's a harder subject to cover. Why? Because of the very fact that it's big. So that would include knowing at least some bit of the company, some bit of history, some bit of its own journey. You can't suddenly write a story about Facebook without knowing what happened in Myanmar, what happened in Sri Lanka, what happened in some other country, in Philippines, in wherever they have had decisive societal impact. You cannot talk about, or you can, but except that your story will not come out as richer as you would have expected. Understanding the company, understanding its journey, understanding its problems is extremely important. And how do you do that? Now that is up to individual reporters. Some just hang out with sources and they, discuss about some whiteboard product plan that didn't work out. That's very granular in my view. But to me, my process in understanding and covering some of these companies has been just know the company and know it well. It's simple. It's a very simple. At this, you can apply to other things where you say know the beat and know it well, right? Knowing the
And a big
company.
part of that is who does what,
A big
how.
part of that is just knowing what it is doing, what the company does, who are the key actors, why are they doing what they're doing, how decisions are made, how some of these decisions are made, to what extent can, let's say, and this is something I keep talking to my Facebook friends about, sources about, they claim huge numbers with AI successes. But then Francis Hogan's papers said they don't have huge successes with AI, although they are making improvements. So where I'm coming from is you need to have certain areas that you want to pick. Let's say content moderation. what are the processes involved. Now these are all learnings that you have to develop as a reporter. These are all interests. Most boring subject, actually, it's not as sexy as people think it is, but you have to do it. You have to go through the policies. It just keeps you, I think, a little bit sharper than the average reporter who might have a good scoop but might not know enough about the company to sort of further it. I personally preserve court records. They are great resources of any information, because usually in the US there is this thing called discovery, where companies or the defendants in this case have to hand over a lot of documents. I mean, none of those are stories. I think one of the
And now there are Twitter handles which are putting out clips from what CEOs of big companies are texting
exactly
and using
exactly it was,
iMessage and like.
but it's beautiful. That was again part of the, the Musk case. But there was this court document which came up, I think, during a trial in the US. The app was called Bikini. I mean, this was about taking any photo on Facebook and it would convert you into a person wearing a bikini or something of that sort. It was some 500 pages of documents. But the most beautiful thing in that, there was this stretch of information. There was this exchange of emails about Facebook's early days of lobbying in India. I never expected to get anything there. It was one of those aha moments, oh, you look it up and see, oh, it was 2011 to 2014, which is probably the most beautiful early days of Facebook, what kind of power it wanted to wield. So there's a claim in that where somebody writes a memo saying, we onboarded the president of India on the platform. It was a great win for us. Nuggets, but it adds up. It shows you that Facebook was getting closer to the government of India. I'm not going with which party, but
And it gives you color, context, background.
exactly. There was this dinner where I think all of these people attended, and it went back as a memo to the US. It was about which politician they met, which, the whole schmoozing around. It gives you a good, as you rightly said, color and context about circumstances in which this happens. You have to just have that little bit of extra interest in, like, okay, man, this is a 500-page document. You can do a control F and check for India. You will find something.
But anyone who wants to effectively hold big tech to account needs to do some version of this, right?
They have to. I mean, it's something that if you really want to do it, you would do it well. But to come back to your point, I think one of the problems why this is even getting bigger is that we're seeing a lot of people who are not technology journalists come into it. And there is enough to say that it's a good thing and it's a funny thing. Good thing because I think the diversity of the space is growing. A funny thing because, like I said, it requires certain amount of meticulous interest in the space. But I think the problem that is happening, and this is something I have hypothesized myself, it is playing out slowly, is that there is a certain type of journalist who's coming into tech, which is the more political journalist. Because I think there is a assumption, and a fair one at that a lot of politics is happening on the internet and largely on these platforms because they control a good chunk of the internet. Let's put it that way. So they think it is a easy sort of route to come in, except that when they come, they discover that this is very different from just going to a panchayat and speaking to a sarpanch and sort of just having a conversation there. Here, you're not just covering politics, you're covering the platform as well. And to me, that is where you need some amount of interest, instinct, and domain knowledge. And I'm not saying domain knowledge in the hard tech space, DKIMs, headers, email headers, verifiers, and all. No, I think that complicates things a lot. But where I'm coming from is you need to understand at least why Facebook algorithms reward political polarization, for example, because engagement. How Facebook's algorithms work to the extent you can understand it because nobody knows it apart from those engineers. But you need to have the ground basics of Facebook covered, Twitter covered, how hashtag jacking happens. You have to know the ground rules of the platform. You have to have that inclination to go and do it. And that is something, that rigor is something I don't find a lot with non-tech journalists. I think tech journalists have gotten into it on their own, but to a large extent, it's been on the other side as well. I mean, they've had to absorb it as well.
Alongside this, I also want to ask about, so if you have to break certain types of stories, now you've been part of the consortium which looked at the
Yes.
Hogan documents,
Yes,
for
yes.
example. So along with journalists who have domain knowledge and all the things you mentioned, you all also need to collaborate with others, right? How have you seen this play out in India and abroad, where it's a little more mature about, hardcore technology people also playing an ancillary role? Because again, they can't substitute the role of a
Yeah,
journalist.
no, I agree. I think
And academics who are reviewing, say, algorithms and
correct,
how larger
correct.
systems work,
Yeah,
etc.
absolutely. I think from a Facebook papers perspective, obviously, it was more of a recommendation from one of their, the people that I get added to it, and we partnered with Hindustan Times to publish stories there. But the most interesting thing there was that we wrote a story that nobody wrote about. Everybody wrote the same thing that everybody else wrote. Washington Post, New York Times, all of these guys. I think Indian Express was part of it. They wrote the same thing that all of these people wrote. Indian reporters probably have better context than American journalists, but there was nothing revelatory there. It was about in the Assam election, AI classifiers were not ready for it. Okay, cool, we know it. It was again an exercise in just reading the papers. I mean, I just loved reading documents. So I went down one of these documents called India 2019 Elections Part 1. And I scroll it down, I see something interesting where Facebook was relatively posting about the fact that they got election commission to do something. I mean, it was a bit of a lobbying effort. It was a bit of a public policy effort, as they call it these days, in quotes. And it was a memo that went back to Menlo Park.
You found evidence that they were able to increase the takedown.
They did play a role in the voluntary code of conduct. The fact that it's voluntary itself, more self-regulatory itself, is something that platforms wanted. But at the same time, the point to ask is, they didn't make this kind of effort in, let's say, Europe, where the takedown times were shorter. They had the issue in the US elections, the one which Trump allegedly won in 2020. They blocked all political ads for 7 days. So why different set of rules in multiple countries? So that was effectively the point we were trying to make. And the fact that, yeah, they got close to the election commission, they used IAMAI to make their case. Now, this nobody had written. I mean, this is just something that we chanced upon, and fair credit to Diksha, my colleague from Hindustan Times, who also helped with the story. It took some time. We never said, gotcha, let's do it. Patience and a lot of reporting. Go back to that document on voluntary code of ethics. It's just one of those things, right? Now, I
So
cannot.
your output can be exciting, the process rarely
Yeah,
is.
it's not exactly,
And
right?
but that's part of the territory.
It's part of the territory. Yes, I did go back to researchers. I constantly speak to some fellows who are working in the space because it keeps me honest. It keeps my biases honest. Okay, we all want to hold big tech accountable through various means. You as an activist, me as a journalist, and you as a researcher. So, but then we constantly keep sort of rechecking, reinforcing our biases, and that is something that helps. Now, particularly with this consortium, this is the only one I've been part of. So, to me, the experience itself was great because I got the thing that nobody else saw. But then I can also tell you that that was again a function of having reported on the space for ahead of the elections. So you had an inkling about this happening. It's just that okay, now it is in their own words. That is what was the exciting part about this. When they say it and when they're saying it to their own audience, less likely that they are massaging the truth, to put it that way, and they are sort of being honest about it. And again, that was a document. So the first thing you do is check the veracity of the document. One of the things I personally do, and I think a lot of older editors may not like, for example, and justifiably so. I mean, there is no obligation on your part to share documents with the company you're accusing or you're sending questions to. I always do it because I think it's important for them to know that A, you're in possession of their document, B, you've reviewed the document. I sometimes cite from the document to show that I have the document. But I usually share a certain glimpse of the document with them so that they also can, so I get more specific answers. Usually, otherwise, there'll be a company statement, this is what, Facebook does not believe in this. I don't want any of that. I want more specific answers. So a lot of old-fashioned journalists may say it's not your business to give them stuff, but I don't mind, giving them a little more to get much more in terms of documents. I think this is something that is hygiene. I think people should start, and I'm saying in a very preachy way, but people should start talking to more experts.
And not just for a quote.
Not just for a quote, engage with them when you're not writing a story. That's the more rewarding time, because you get to learn so much. I mean, I engage with people in the US, for example. I engage with a lot of them when I'm not writing a story, because that's when we can have a freewheeling conversation on a lot of things. Keep being persistent. I think one of the beautiful qualities that reporters have is persistence. When you're not persistent enough, I think you do see lapses. So to me, I think the Hogan papers did a very good job, because the documents were authenticated. Facebook did not dispute it. It brought new things to light. I mean, what we knew, but here it is. There are the receipts, right? So it opened a completely different type of investigative journalism, because you have a whistleblower at one end, but you still have to sort of do more reporting at the other end. A good rounded story. Nobody raised any questions about Hogan papers, including Facebook. I mean, they may have defended their positions on it, saying these are all outdated papers, but that's about it. These papers are true. So I think minimize doubt, maximize engagement with the company, with your researchers. I mean, if you don't make an attempt to understand the company, understand the concepts, understand how things work in those companies, you will never be able to get it.
And this is true of all business journalism.
It is true of all business
If you're
journalism.
if you're trying to do a story on a big multinational, there's enough Byzantine private bureaucracy that you have to
deal
figure
with.
out.
Yeah. Imagine covering BCCI. I mean, that's a different ball game altogether. You have to put in that effort to go wait for that one quote, cultivate relationships. It's how the Dow is made, right? I mean, you have to do it. I see a lot of pride in not doing a great story than doing a story which doesn't hold up, right? So those are little nuances that you need to sort of tackle, but that's where an editor comes in and says, man, this is not working. Yeah, one of the things editors still ask you, and I think good editors will always ask you, is how's your story holding up? As a reporter, as a writer, you usually think about, oh, is it on course to meet the deadline? But the more I think of it, I think, and the more I've sort of internalized it as well, how is the story holding up is actually a good line to sort of ask yourself, okay, is this even holding up? Rather than when are you going to give it, which is obviously another aspect of journalism, is deadlines. So yeah,
And that's something that comes with budgets, with freedoms, with
everything.
resources. And I think that's something where we're just seeing the beginnings, right? With tech journalism, with both mainstream houses devoting more resources perhaps to this space, and many others where you also work, well, like The Signal, with the Ken,
Yeah,
Morning Context, many others who are coming up sort of with some focus.
this is very similar to how Wall Street became, or how Wall Street grew to become this big in the US, where inevitably everybody wanted to put focus on them. Today, these companies are, I think, have a collective market capitalization of about whatever, $5-6 trillion. It's not funny.
And user bases, which are a significant percentage of the global human population.
That is, and a majority of those with their largest user bases in this country. I think on the business side, on the corporate side, when you want to cover companies like this, there is definitely a lot of potential. What I have learned over the last 6 years, I've covered tech policy and platform dynamics for the last 6 years. To me, I think the biggest takeaway has been that lens that Facebook, Google, etc., are put in India is not enough. And that could be lack of resources, lack of interest. As an editor, would I want to publish a kick-ass story on a potential swindle or some content moderation problem? I mean, it's not given the same breadth, right? In India, tech is still seen from a gadgets perspective, although I think that impression is changing, courtesy Ken, Morning Context, Cap Table, ET Prime. They brought a lot of, as you rightly put in, I think you got it best, focus into the space, which I think is important. And obviously, people like Apar and IFF and all these guys who have constantly been at the forefront of this, they've also played a significant role in, I think, in bringing some interest to digital rights.
And that's clearly not journalism, right? That is necessary digital rights advocacy, activism.
It is
and so
absolutely
on.
mandatory.
And you need researchers, you need all of that. but you also need all of them to be exactly what they say they are, right? I mean, you can't mistake activism for journalism.
I don't.
and vice
You
versa.
can't. You can't. And you can't. Otherwise, you'll end up with situations like this. They are playing their role, and they're sort of playing a good role, because this is by far the largest market for Facebook, for Google, for Twitter. May be disputable, but for other companies, I think there is a consensus today among the right, among the left, globally, wherever, if you want to take the Republicans in the US, the Democrats in the US, that big tech is become way big, too big to,
To handle.
to handle. Issues may be different, but that consensus, that middle of the road consensus around big tech has been achieved. And now it's about reaching consensus of what to do with them. The fact that the US is thinking in those lines or on those lines, and Europe obviously has been regulating regularly actually, is a good starting point. With this consensus, ideological consensus, like the Republicans, at least I'm assuming pre-Trump, were the party of no regulation or little or small regulation, small government, they used to say. And now there are laws that are being passed in Texas to hold social media accountable for the content anybody puts up and for taking down any content somebody puts up. There is a slight, I don't want to call it a movement. I think it's a bit of a readjustment, realignment in their political priorities, which is coming through in at least the US. I think similar realignments are possible in India. But obviously, why would a party that can control the narrative so beautifully in such a sophisticated manner want to give away that ability to do so? So I think India will be harder to get by.
Which also means that the India stories will be of a different flavor than what might be coming out of elsewhere. Right?
It should be of a different flavor as well. I think the India story should be about user bases. The India story should be about challenges that these companies face in markets like India, not from a advertising revenue perspective, but from actually an enforcement perspective. But why does Facebook very quickly take down far right militias in the US who violate or allegedly plan to violate mask mandates? This was at the height of the pandemic. Whereas similar, conspiracy theorists in India were not taken down. And as long as there is a lack of transparency on enforcement, by enforcement, I mean taking down posts, taking down users. You're going to find these wire stories coming up every now and then. I think that is platform accountability. Platforms need to be transparent about why a certain thing has been taken down. Here, it's not about getting away. It's just that there's less focus because there is less people who cover this space. Some of the best journalism on Facebook in India has come from the Wall Street Journal. And that to me is an indictment of our press here. It's taken a lot of people a while to, and even in the US, a lot of people in the while to sort of meticulously investigate platforms. In India, they don't do it. They just don't do it because they don't understand.
So yeah, I'm glad that while this particular incident was far from positive, at least the conversation has picked up some more. We desperately need good tech journalism in the country, not just looking at big tech, but startups which might become big in the future, and how our country and our society navigates the increasing sort of presence of technology. So Venkat, thank you for joining me on BIC Talks. It was a pleasure to have you here. And good to have
Thank you so much for having me, man. I appreciate this.
Thank you for staying on for the full conversation. If you liked what you heard, please share it with family and friends. You can also leave us a review on iTunes or Apple Podcasts. The crew that makes these podcasts possible are Gaurav Krishna and Ishan Gupta on sound supervision and production, with support from S. Sarvanaraj and Raghavendra Tenkaila. Artwork and design is by Chandani Venkataraman of Crisscross Design Studios. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel on your favorite podcast platform. It can also be accessed on our website, bangaloreinternationalcenter.org. Do follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter to get regular updates on our programming. This is Lekha Naidu signing off on behalf of everyone at BIC.